Yo, check this out.
Welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to do behind the scenes of how I made my Cooking with Addie video. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I'll leave a link in the descriptions below. It's a really short cooking sequence I did with my friend's cat Addie, and it'll give you a lot more context to the rest of this video. So without a further ado, let go. Alright, so the first 3 scenes were shot in my room that I have simulated here in a game called Cinetracer. I used 3 different camera positions. The first one was on a tripod behind my chair, and I made sure it was high enough to capture both my ears and the top of my head. Also, if you guys didn't notice, my mirror is not actually gray. I masked it out because it caught my lamp, which made it a bit distracting. The second camera position was in front of me, using a GorillaPod right next to my monitor. For this shot, I wanted to make sure that instead of rubbing my belly, I clenched it. For the third camera position, I placed it in the same position as the second one, but I raised it up higher. After looking up from my belly, I wanted to make sure to look away dramatically as a transition into the rest of the video with music. This then takes us to my living room and kitchen area, which we will head on down over to. This is gonna be a problem. Alright, so we made it down, and this is where things get good. What the For the transition, I walked from my front door to the kitchen rather than from my room. This is because my room is literally right next to the kitchen. By doing this, I was able to lengthen the footage as well as add more movement in the scene. I used 2 different camera positions. The first was on top of a table chair to catch me coming around through the living room, and the other was on the floor to get my footsteps before I entered the kitchen. And since most of the video was recorded at 120 frames per second at 1080p and the timeline was 24 FPS, I was able to slow down and speed up the footage in post to go along with the music. To add some spice, for scene 4, I masked out myself using a rotobrush tool and added the original video layer as the background. I then alpha matted the layer with the mask to fade myself and the background separately. Opening the fridge and grabbing the pork loin was simple. I placed the camera again in 2 different positions, one on a tripod in the doorway of the kitchen, except without a camera operator, Hola! And one inside the fridge sitting behind the pork. However, I can't show this to you because the fridge doesn't open in this game.
My name is Jeff.
But rest assured, it was sitting stationary inside the fridge. Also, if you didn't notice, I accidentally left my tripod in the back of this shot when I opened the fridge. Go! Scene 8 was used as a filler and disconnect from continuity before the glorious meat toss in the next 3 scenes. I filmed this handheld right behind my kitchen table. I stood up, gradually increasing in speed, and rotated the camera upwards at the end to further increase the speed and add some motion blur. Oh yes, the glorious meat toss. So I thought it would be a cool idea to toss the pork loin in the air and get one wide and one close-up shot. Yeah, that's right. I'm using a cutting board with bread to represent the pork loin because there isn't one in this game.
My name is Jeff.
For the wide shot, I placed the camera on a tripod in the center of the kitchen facing upwards and away. I then proceeded to toss the pork in the air, again, and again, and again, until I finally got the perfect shot. For the close-up, I kept the camera in the same location but raised it up higher. What the? I originally intended to toss it the same way I did for the wide shot, but I soon realized it was too difficult to get it in the frame because of the smaller field of view of zooming in. So I had to improvise. So instead of tossing it, I just held the pork with both my hands and carried it across the camera to the finish line. I then masked it out and applied a clean background layer of the kitchen. Voila! Perfecto! But wait, there's more. I then applied a zoom in transition preset to tie the two scenes together. I learned this from Justin Odisho's tutorial video on zoom in transitions in Premiere Pro, so check him out to learn how to apply this transition. I'll leave a link to the specific video in the description below. Now for the landing, I placed the tripod right next to the kitchen counter. I then dropped the pork several times onto the cutting board until I was satisfied with how it turned out. Scenes 12 through 16 were pretty straightforward. What you saw was what I did. I didn't do very much editing in post except for some color correcting. My goal with the sequence was to disconnect each scene with a different perspective, but to maintain continuity. However, cutting the bag open and grabbing the pork were much more difficult and messier than I thought. I had planned to film one clean cut through the bag, but as you can tell, my scissors were not sharp enough and it took multiple cuts through the plastic. Even then, I had to pivot and just rip it open with my hand. Thankfully, it didn't turn out too bad. And oh yeah, Addie could smell the raw meat from miles away, so as soon as I opened the bag, he was on the set ready to go. The messiest part of the whole video was pulling the pork out of the bag. For this scene, I used a slider on top of my tripod to essentially motion track with the pork loin as I pulled them out. This meant I had to find something to weigh down the bag. I first tried using a bottle of vinegar, then a toolbox, and finally a heavy paint bucket. Synchronizing my left hand with the slider to my right hand pulling the pork was no easy feat. Long story short, it took many attempts, not to mention the slider kept teetering by the weight of the camera, and I had to wash my hands frequently. Oh, and just a reminder, Addie was desperate to get a bite. For this scene, I placed my camera a bit away from me on a tripod, and the goal was to get a wide-angle shot to get more details of my kitchen. I then added a meow sound effect to introduce Addie before giving him the spotlight in the next scene. I originally thought it was going to be easy to get Addie to cooperate and look into the camera, but I soon realized if I couldn't get his attention, he would just look away. So I thought it would be a good idea to get him more engaged by feeding him small bits of pork. Another difficulty I experienced was trying to get Addie to look directly into the camera while holding the camera still in one hand and dangling a piece of pork with the other. Fortunately, the decision to feed Addie paid dividends because after a couple attempts, I got this gem of a shot of him licking his mouth. If I had to pick any scene that inspired me to make this entire video, it would be this one. I know what you're thinking. But don't worry, there's good reason. At the time, I wanted to practice using audio sound effects to accentuate an emotion without any dialogue. That led me to juxtapose the whole cool cinematic sequence with the realization in the end of having to share it with an unsuspecting Addie. To further heighten my dilemma, I added more meow sound effects, a flatline heartbeat, a cinematic bass rumble, and a reverse speed explosion blast to crescendo into the final scene. There were many ways I had imagined filming this last scene, such as Addie and I eating our own separate meals with mine being cooked, of course. But because it was already getting dark, I just put the pork on a plate and served it to Addie on the kitchen table. Low-key, I was excited and curious to see how Addie would react to 4 pounds of pork loin all to himself. It became apparent that Addie couldn't really indulge himself. He tried to bite off a piece, then resorted to licking, and finally to boredom. And because I didn't realize I had my external monitor in the shot, I had to reshoot and get his attention again by cutting small edible pieces of pork. I then added a different song and kaboom! The video was complete. Here was my original paper storyboard I drew months ago. After I picked the song, I let my imagination loose to connect the dots between the scenes and the music. If you really enjoyed this video, click on the like button and let me know in the comments below because your comments mean a lot. Thanks for watching.